What happens when Hollywood royalty meets radio royalty and the gloves come off? What unfolds when a duchess walks into the lion's den, expecting royal treatment but gets the Howard Stern experience instead? You won't believe what transpired during last night's explosive episode that had the entire internet buzzing within minutes of airing. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when Meghan Markle thought she could control the narrative on Howard Stern's show. The stage was set for what many expected to be a softball promotional appearance. Meghan Markle, fresh off her latest media venture, had agreed to appear on the Howard Stern show to discuss her upcoming projects and continue her carefully orchestrated media rehabilitation tour. What nobody anticipated was that Howard wasn't in the mood to play along with the usual celebrity PR playbook. From the moment Meghan settled into the guest chair, something felt different. Howard's energy was sharper than usual, his questions more pointed. The atmosphere in Studio 69 crackled with intention that even longtime listeners could sense through their speakers. Robin Quivers, Howard's co-host, seemed to pick up on it immediately, her usual warmth replaced by a watchful silence. "So, Meghan," Howard began, leaning back in his chair with that familiar predatory smile, "let's talk about authenticity. You've built this whole brand around being authentic, speaking your truth. But I gotta ask you something that's been bothering me." He paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the air. "When did you decide that authenticity meant rewriting history every time you sit down for an interview?" The question hit like a lightning bolt. Meghan's media-trained smile faltered for just a fraction of a second before snapping back into place, but Howard caught it. The audience caught it. Even through the radio waves, you could feel the shift in energy. "I'm not sure what you mean by that, Howard," Meghan replied, her voice maintaining that carefully modulated tone she'd perfected over years of public speaking. "I've always been consistent in sharing my experiences and my truth." "Your truth," Howard repeated, emphasizing each word with theatrical precision. "See, that's interesting phrasing. Because truth used to be just, truth. Now everyone's got their own version. It's like ordering at Starbucks. Everyone's got their own special blend." The tension in the studio was palpable. Fred Norris, usually invisible behind his sound effects board, seemed frozen, unsure whether to punctuate the moment with one of his trademark audio stings. This wasn't the usual Howard Stern celebrity roast. This felt personal, targeted, dangerous. Meghan shifted in her chair, her posture straightening into what royal watchers would recognize as her defensive stance. "Howard, I think there's been some misunderstanding about my intentions. I came here today to talk about my new projects and the positive work I'm doing." "Oh, the positive work," Howard said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Let me ask you about that positive work. Is part of that positive work throwing your family under the bus every chance you get? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've made a career out of playing the victim while simultaneously stepping on everyone who helped you get where you are." The studio fell silent except for the low hum of the equipment. This wasn't going according to anyone's script. Meghan's handlers, visible through the glass partition, were frantically whispering among themselves, clearly debating whether to intervene. "That's not fair, Howard," Meghan said, her voice now carrying an edge that her media training hadn't quite managed to smooth away. "You don't know what I've been through. You don't know the challenges I've faced or the racism I've experienced." "Racism," Howard repeated flatly. "Right. So let me get this straight. You marry into literally the most privileged family on the planet, get a fairy tale wedding that cost millions, live in palaces, and your takeaway is that you're a victim of racism? Meanwhile, there are people actually struggling with real racism who don't have the luxury of complaining about it from their Montecito mansion." The gloves were officially off. Meghan's carefully constructed media persona began to crack as her voice rose slightly. "You have no idea what it's like to be constantly scrutinized, to have every move you make dissected and criticized, to have your children's safety threatened." "Your children's safety threatened?" Howard leaned forward, his reporter instincts kicking in. "By who? The paparazzi you call when you want positive coverage? The same media machine you've been feeding stories to for years? Or are we talking about the family members you've been systematically destroying in interviews? Robin finally spoke up, her voice cutting through the tension. Howard, maybe we should. No, Robin, Howard interrupted, his eyes never leaving Meghan. I think our guest wants to have a real conversation for once. Isn't that right, Meghan? Isn't this what authenticity looks like? Or do you only do authentic when you can control the narrative? Meghan's composure was visibly cracking. Her hands, which had been folded neatly in her lap, were now gripping the arms of her chair. You're being incredibly disrespectful, Howard. I came here in good faith to have a conversation, not to be attacked. Attacked? Howard laughed, but there was no humor in it. Lady, this isn't an attack. This is what a real interview looks like when someone isn't spoon-feeding you softball questions. You want to talk about disrespect? Let's talk about how you disrespected an entire institution, an entire family, and an entire country because things didn't go exactly the way you wanted them to. The confrontation was escalating rapidly, and everyone in the studio could feel it spiraling towards something unprecedented. Meghan's team behind the glass was now openly gesturing, trying to get her attention, but she was locked in combat with Howard, her media training abandoned in favor of raw emotion. You don't understand the pressures I was under. Meghan shot back, her voice now clearly strained. The isolation, the lack of support, the way I was treated by the institution and the media, I had to protect myself and my family. Protect yourself? Howard's voice rose to match hers. By going on Oprah and torching everyone who helped you? By writing books and doing interviews where you paint yourself as the innocent victim while everyone else is the villain? That's not protection. That's character assassination with a PR team. The studio was electric with tension as these two media titans faced off, neither willing to back down, both too proud to retreat. What had started as a promotional appearance was rapidly becoming the most explosive confrontation in Howard Stern show history. And everyone present knew they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. But this was just the beginning, because Howard Stern was far from finished, and Meghan Markle was about to discover that controlling the narrative wasn't going to be as easy as she thought. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity before Howard leaned back in his chair, that infamous smirk spreading across his face. He'd drawn blood, and everyone in the studio knew it. But instead of backing off, he pressed harder, like a shark sensing weakness in the water. You know what I find fascinating, Meghan? Howard said, his voice deceptively calm now, which somehow made it even more menacing. You talk about being isolated and unsupported, but let's talk about what really happened. You had an entire PR machine working for you. You had staff, advisors, the best of everything. But somehow, everyone around you was the problem. Everyone except you. Meghan's jaw tightened visibly. That's a gross oversimplification of what I went through, Howard. You're reducing complex institutional problems to complex institutional problems? Howard interrupted, his voice rising again. Is that what we're calling it when you can't get along with your sister-in-law? When you make bridesmaids cry? When staff members are quitting left and right because they can't work with you? At what point do you look in the mirror and think, maybe I'm the common denominator here? The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Robin shifted uncomfortably in her chair, while Fred remained statue-still behind his console. This was territory even Howard rarely ventured into, the complete dismantling of a guest's public persona in real time. That's not what happened, Meghan said, her voice now trembling with barely controlled anger. Those are tabloid narratives designed to tear me down. I was bullied by the British press from day one, and when I tried to defend myself, I was painted as difficult. Bullied by the British press? Howard's laugh was sharp and cutting. The same press that gave you wall-to-wall positive coverage when you first started dating Harry? The same press that celebrated your engagement, your wedding, your pregnancy? They only turned on you when you started acting like you were bigger than the institution you married into. You don't know what you're talking about, Meghan snapped, her composure finally cracking completely. You weren't there. You didn't see how they treated me behind closed doors. You didn't experience the microaggressions, the subtle racism, the way they tried to silence me when I tried to speak up for what was right. Howard pounced on her words, like a predator sensing vulnerability. Microaggressions? Subtle racism? From the family that welcomed you with open arms? That spent millions on your wedding? That gave you a platform bigger than most world leaders? Come on, Meghan. You're sitting here talking about racism while you systematically destroyed the reputation of an elderly woman who dedicated her entire life to public service. The mention of the Queen seemed to strike a nerve deeper than anything Howard had said so far. Meghan's face flushed with anger, and her carefully maintained royal composure evaporated entirely. "Don't you dare lecture me about the Queen," she said, her voice rising to a level that made the audio engineers scramble for their controls. "You have no idea what that family is really like behind closed doors. The silence, the complicity, the way they protect their own while throwing everyone else to the wolves." "Their own?" Howard leaned forward aggressively. "Last I checked, you married into that family. Harry was their own too, until you convinced him to burn every bridge he had. You turned a war hero, a beloved prince, into your personal attack dog against his own family. How does that feel, knowing you destroyed a man's relationship with his father, his brother, his entire heritage?" The studio was electric with tension as Meghan's mask finally slipped completely. "Harry made his own choices. I didn't force him to do anything. He saw how I was being treated, and he chose to protect his wife and children. That's what real men do. They protect their families." "Protect?" Howard's voice dripped with disdain. "Is that what you call it when you air your family's dirty laundry on international television? When you make vague accusations about racism without naming names, letting the internet destroy innocent people? When you release private conversations and personal details for profit? That's not protection, Meghan. That's revenge." The accusation hit like a physical blow. Meghan's hands were visibly shaking now, her carefully applied makeup unable to hide the flush of anger coloring her cheeks. Her team behind the glass was in full panic mode, gesturing frantically for her to end the interview, but she was too deep in the fight to back down. "You think you know everything, don't you?" Meghan said, her voice now shaking with rage. "Sitting in your studio, making jokes, thinking you understand what it's like to be a woman of color, trying to navigate an institution built on centuries of exclusion and privilege. You have no idea what I sacrificed, what I gave up, what I endured." "What you endured?" Howard stood up from his chair now, towering over the interview space. "You endured living in palaces? You endured having a staff of dozens? You endured wearing million-dollar jewelry and designer clothes? You endured having the entire world watching your fairy tale wedding? My heart bleeds for you, truly." The sarcasm was so thick it could be cut with a knife. Robin tried once more to intervene. "Howard, maybe we should take a break." "No breaks," Howard snapped, never taking his eyes off Meghan. "Our guest wanted authenticity. She wanted a real conversation. Well, here it is. No handlers, no scripted questions, no safe space, just truth." Meghan was on her feet now too, her carefully arranged composure completely shattered. "You want truth? The truth is that you're a bully who gets off on tearing people down. The truth is that you represent everything that's wrong with media. The cruelty, the lack of empathy, the willingness to destroy people for entertainment. And you," Howard shot back, pointing directly at her, "represent everything that's wrong with modern celebrity culture. The victimhood, the entitlement, the inability to take responsibility for your own actions. You've made a career out of burning bridges and then claiming you're being persecuted when people don't want to work with you anymore." The confrontation had reached a fever pitch, with both participants standing, facing off across the interview table like gladiators in an arena. The studio staff was frozen, unsure whether to intervene or let this historic meltdown continue to unfold. But Meghan wasn't finished. Her eyes blazed with fury as she prepared to deliver what she clearly thought would be the killing blow, setting the stage for the most explosive finale in talk show history. "You want to know what the real truth is, Howard?" Meghan's voice was now pure venom, her royal training completely abandoned. "The real truth is that you're a has-been shock jock who peaked 20 years ago, and now you have to attack women to stay relevant. You're threatened by strong women who don't bow down to your pathetic attempts at intimidation." The studio went dead silent. Even Howard seemed momentarily stunned by the sheer audacity of the attack. But if Meghan thought she had landed a devastating blow, she had severely underestimated who she was dealing with. Howard's face slowly transformed into something that regular listeners would recognize as his most dangerous expression, the calm before the storm. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, measured, and absolutely lethal. "Strong women?" Howard said, each word dripping with contempt. "Lady, I've interviewed actual strong women. Oprah built an empire from nothing. Barbara Walters broke barriers when journalism was a boys' club. Hillary Clinton fought her way to the top of American politics. You? You married into royalty and then spent every waking moment complaining about how hard your life was. That's not strength. That's the opposite of strength." Meghan's face went white with rage. "How dare you compare me to other women like we're competing in some misogynistic ranking system? You don't get to define what strength looks like for women, especially women of color who face challenges you could never understand." "Women of color?" Howard's voice rose to match hers. "You want to talk about women of color? Let's talk about all the women of color who actually face real discrimination, real poverty, real struggles, while you sit in your mansion complaining about how the royal family didn't appreciate your Hollywood background enough. You've turned your mixed-race heritage into a weapon you use whenever someone criticizes your behavior." The accusation was so brutal, so direct, that the entire studio seemed to recoil. Fred actually looked up from his console for the first time during the entire interview, his eyes wide with shock. Robin's mouth was hanging open. Even Meghan's handlers had stopped their frantic gesturing and were simply staring in horror. "That is disgusting," Meghan spat, her voice now shaking with pure fury. "You're disgusting. To sit there and minimize the racism I've experienced? To dismiss my struggles because I had privileges. That's exactly the kind of toxic masculinity and white privilege that I've been fighting against my entire adult life." "White privilege?" Howard laughed, but it was a harsh, bitter sound. "I'm the son of a radio engineer from Queens who worked his way up from nothing. You grew up in Hollywood, went to private schools, had acting coaches, and married a prince. But somehow I'm the privileged one? The delusion is incredible." Meghan was visibly trembling now, her carefully applied makeup starting to run as her emotional control completely collapsed. "You don't know anything about my childhood, about what I went through growing up biracial in America, about the struggles I faced trying to make it in Hollywood as a woman of color." "Struggles in Hollywood?" Howard pounced on her words like a predator. "You mean the struggles that led to you landing a starring role on a hit TV show? The struggles that put you on red carpets and in magazines? The struggles that introduced you to the social circles where you met a prince? Those struggles? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like Hollywood worked out pretty well for you." The confrontation had reached a level of intensity that nobody in the studio had ever witnessed. Meghan was now openly crying, but they were tears of rage rather than sadness. Her whole body was shaking as she pointed an accusatory finger at Howard. "You are everything that is wrong with this world," she screamed, her voice cracking with emotion. "You sit there in your privileged position, tearing down women, especially women of color, for entertainment. You're a relic from a toxic era that the world is moving beyond. And you," Howard roared back, now fully unleashed, "are everything that's wrong with modern celebrity culture. You take every advantage, use every privilege, exploit every opportunity, and then play victim when people call you out on your behavior. You've made victimhood into a brand, and frankly, it's pathetic." The word pathetic seemed to be the final straw. Meghan's face contorted with pure rage as she grabbed her purse from beside her chair and stood up so violently that her chair nearly toppled over. "I don't have to sit here and listen to this abuse from a washed-up radio host who thinks he's still relevant," she shouted, her voice now hoarse from the emotional strain. "You're nothing but a bully with a microphone, and I'm done giving you the attention you so desperately crave." "There it is," Howard called out as she started to storm toward the studio door. "The real Meghan Markle. When things don't go your way, when you can't control the narrative, when someone asks you real questions instead of kissing your royal behind, you run away. Just like you ran away from your family Just like you ran away from England, just like you run away from every situation where you can't be the victim. Meghan spun around at the door, her face streaked with tears and twisted with fury. You know what, Howard? History will remember me as someone who stood up for what was right, who fought against racism and inequality, who used my platform to make the world better. You'll be remembered as a sad old man who got his kicks from humiliating women on the radio. History. Howard laughed one final time. History will remember you as the woman who married a prince and then spent the rest of her life complaining about it. The woman who had everything handed to her and still wasn't satisfied. The woman who turned being a royal into a professional grievance. With that final exchange, Meghan Markle ripped open the studio door with such force that it slammed against the wall. Her team scrambled to follow her as she stormed down the hallway, her heels clicking furiously against the floor. The sound of her departure echoed through the studio as the door slowly swung shut behind her. Howard remained standing for a moment, breathing heavily, before slowly sinking back into his chair. The studio was absolutely silent, except for the low hum of the equipment and the distant sound of elevator doors closing as Meghan and her team made their escape. Robin was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. Well, that, Howard said, wiping sweat from his forehead, was exactly what happens when someone who's used to controlling every interview, every narrative, every conversation, meets someone who doesn't play by their rules. Fred finally found his voice. I've been working here for 30 years, and I've never seen anything like that. Howard nodded, still catching his breath from the intensity of the confrontation. That's what authenticity actually looks like, folks. Not the sanitized, focus-grouped version that celebrities try to sell you. Real authenticity is messy, it's uncomfortable, and sometimes it reveals things that people would rather keep hidden. As the studio slowly returned to normal, with staff members beginning to move around again and equipment being adjusted, it was clear that everyone present had witnessed something unprecedented. The most explosive celebrity meltdown in radio history had just unfolded in real time, and the aftershocks would be felt across the media landscape for months to come. The interview that was supposed to be a simple promotional appearance had instead become a masterclass in what happens when Hollywood privilege meets New York directness. When carefully constructed, public personas collide with unfiltered questioning, and when someone who spent years controlling their narrative finally encounters a situation they can't manipulate. Howard looked directly into the microphone one final time. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Meghan Markle, showing us exactly who she really is when the cameras are rolling and she can't edit the footage. Sometimes the most revealing interviews are the ones where the guest reveals more than they ever intended to. And with that, one of the most explosive confrontations in talk show history came to its dramatic conclusion, leaving listeners across the country stunned by what they had just witnessed, and ensuring that this interview would be talked about, analyzed, and replayed for years to come.